Okay, recording is started.
Okay. Hey guys, thanks for coming out today. It's pretty dreary, so it's actually not a bad day to be stuck inside. But my name is Kristen Bennett, and I'm a local history assistant at the Spartanburg County Public Libraries. And I have been working in the Kennedy Room since 2013. And part of my job there is to work with our oral history collection. So that consists of going out and doing interviews and bringing them back and processing them, editing or transcribing them, editing them, and things like that. So just wanted to start out briefly discussing, what are oral history interviews, just in case you're not completely familiar with that term. In a nutshell, an oral history interview consists of sitting down with someone and talking to them about their memories and experiences, and in the process, recording their answers. The Oral History Association sums it up pretty well when they, with the definition that they wrote. And it says the oral history is a field of study and a method of gathering, preserving, and interpreting the voices and memories of people, communities, and participants in past events. So why should we do oral history? Oral histories are a great way to add to the historical record, whether it's the historical record of society as a whole or just that of your family. One of my favorite quotes about oral history comes from a leader in the field named Doug Boyd, and he said that some of the interviewee's details might be fuzzy, memory is far from perfect, but the recording captures something that eludes the historian. How a person felt or what he or she thought about a certain event, place, or time they experienced. Recorded oral history is more than just a quote on a page in a book. It's a meaningful story expressed by the person who owns that story. And not only do oral histories help us capture the emotions and feelings surrounding a particular event, but it also gives us a more personal perspective a lot of the time. Where history books may cover history on a larger or broader scale, or where they may focus more on the main figures in that particular time. Oral histories are often a good way to preserve the experiences of the average person and, thus the masses. And depending on the subject, it's really a great way to capture history that might not be captured any other way. For instance, your grandmother may never write an autobiography of her life. So if you don't ask her those questions, you don't record her answers, then eventually her knowledge and her story is going to be lost to time. So this is just a quick list of a few of the oral history projects that we've been working on at the Spartanburg County Public Libraries in the Kennedy Room. The Schools of Spartanburg Past was one of the first projects that we started when I came on board, and it's kind of my baby. It's one of my favorites. And through it, we've been interviewing people who attended or taught at schools in Spartanburg that are no longer in existence. So we've talked to people who were from Calkins High School or Florence Chapel, Highland Elementary School, just to name a few. And one of the neat things to this project is that we talked to several individuals who were a part of integrating the school systems in Spartanburg during the early 1970s. The Carver Reunion Project stemmed from the school project, and we were invited to go out to a Carver High School reunion, and we were able to help do these little mini 15-minute interviews with some of the alumni there. And then the Landrum Oral History Project is one of our more recent projects. A few years ago, the city of Landrum reached out to us and they asked us to come and do some interviews with some of their residents. And so we've talked to people, about the businesses that were there, the schools, how the community has changed. One of the interesting things from that project is we've been able to talk to some people about the African American community in Landrum and what that was like during various time periods and about African American businesses that were in that area. So most of these interviews are available for you to come in and check or come in and look at, with some advance notice, preferably. Give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'm happy to pull these for you and let you look at them. And we're always open to new interviews. So if you have a story that might fit into one of these projects, or if you have a new idea for a project, feel free to reach out and let us know. We're always looking for other people to talk to. So I've split this presentation up into 3 sections, and we're going to look at what you need to do before you interview someone, and things to keep in mind during the interview, and then things to do after the interview's over. And so in this first section, we're going to look at things like recording devices, research, questions, and setup. So the first thing I'm going to start out with is recording options, because I feel like that might be the biggest question most people have when they're starting out. with doing oral histories. I've been doing oral histories since I was in college, and I know a lot of the times I still feel like that's my biggest question mark. We've recently decided that we're going to try to upgrade our equipment, and so whenever I start looking at equipment, it's easy to get pretty overwhelmed. But really, if you're looking to do some amateur oral history interviews, you kind of got the world at your fingertips. There's so many options. But the first thing you're going to have to decide is whether you're going to use audio or video recordings. And I very rarely do I use video recordings. I use them when someone makes me use them, and there's several reasons for that. You know, video files, they're harder to store, they're larger, and so if you're going to be doing several interviews, they're going to take up a lot of space if you use video files. It takes longer to set up the video recordings than it does audio recordings, and a lot of times you need an extra person who can be managing that equipment while you're doing the interview, and I'm a one-person show, so it would be difficult for me to have to pay attention to the video camera and also do the interview and ask questions and listen to what's being said. But mostly I just find that video cameras can be a bit awkward for people. They make me uncomfortable, and when I have used them, they tend to make the other person uncomfortable. You know, people don't like to think about being recorded, especially with videos. So I tend to pass up on that. But it's not all bad. Some people love using video, and there are perks to it. For instance, if you have a video recording, you're going to get to see what that person looks like, and you're going to get to see the emotions that they have better. You know, like how they respond to certain questions, or you know, how their body language changes. So there are perks to it, but I'm not going to talk about video very much because I just don't know it as well. If you have questions about it, you can feel free to email me and I will research it, but it's just not what I use. The thing that I like the most about audio recordings is, you know, the recorder that I use, it's small, it's like the size of my palm. And so I can put that on the table and leave it and not worry about it. And it's so small that after a little bit, people tend to forget it's there. And so I think that it just helps people relax. So once you decide how you're going to record it, whether you're using audio or video, you will also have to decide what device you're going to use. And like I said, there's a ton of options. If you want to get a recording or a recording device, a recorder, this one on the screen is the Olympus LS11, and it's what I've been using since I've been at the library. I think it was probably a mid-grade recorder when it first came out, and it's been pretty good. I haven't had any issues with it. I don't think that they're still making it, but you can find it like places like eBay for a fairly reasonable price. And you know, you can always go to Best Buy. You can look online for recorders. They can range anywhere from $50 to $100, or you know, you can get up to $600, $1,000, just depending on what kind of bells and whistles you get. But if you're just starting out, I would recommend getting a pretty basic one. And honestly, and if you do want one, I'll say this, I forgot to mention it. There is a website. It's sponsored by Oral History in the Digital Age, and it's called Ask Doug. And this is actually the Doug that I just mentioned earlier in when I was quoting him. But you can go to this website, the link is in the handout, and you can answer a series of questions, and then it'll tell you the best recorders for your particular project. And that's a pretty neat resource that can give you an idea of at least what to be looking for. But, you know, if you're just starting out and you're going to just do a few family history interviews, I would recommend checking out some apps or programs that you can use via your smartphone or maybe your computer. There's several free apps that you can download to your phone. StoryCorps has an app. They've had it for several years, and it's pretty easy to use. I got an email the other day about Family Search. They have an app now for oral histories, and I haven't had a chance to look at it, but it would be, you know, something to look into. Also, you could use Zoom or Skype, especially right now when we're kind of trying to stay away from people and social distancing. These might be good options. And this might be a way to, you know, get that video recording without making people uncomfortable. It's a little less in your face, I think, when you're just sitting at the computer talking than having a video camera in your face. So definitely things to check out. So when you are choosing what you're going to record with, there are a few things that you should keep in mind. You know, things to think about. Are there any time limits, you know, to how long I can record? Are there file size limits? You know, how can I download this interview? You know, what kind of file is it going to come out as? Think about what are they going to do with my interview. I know when StoryCorps first started, and I'm not sure if they're still doing it. I don't think they are. When they first started, they were archiving all the interviews that came through the app to the Library of Congress. So, you want to see how the app might be storing and archiving your interview. If they are archiving it, can you opt out of it? Just see what your choices are. One thing to think about is someone had told me before they had done an oral history interview with a relative, and they were using a phone app. And so the phone app works fine. It was great. But when your phone goes to sleep, what happens? Their phone went to sleep and they lost part of that interview. And so when you lose part of an interview, you can't get that exact interview back. So you want to just make sure that you know all the ins and outs of that audio recorder. So prior to your research, or prior to your interview, you're going to want to do some research. The kind of research you're going to do is it's going to vary depending on the topic of your interview. So for instance, if I'm interviewing someone about the schools of Spartanburg past, I might do some research on the school they attended during a particular time period. I might look at school directories, yearbooks, community histories that talk about that school. If the person helped integrate the school system, I might look up newspaper articles from that time period to get a sense of how the integration process went and how the community reacted. If you're interviewing a relative about their life, you might want to brush up on some family history. Use Ancestry, yearbook, or not yearbooks, but census records, obituaries, and things like that, just to get an idea of the family makeup. One of the first interviews I did was with a woman who was in the Red Cross during World War II. And so to prepare for that interview, I kind of did a bunch of research on women's experiences in World War II. And there's several reasons you want to do this research. First of all, it's going to help you form relevant questions. It's going to help you ask better follow-up questions. It's going to make you seem like you at least know a little bit about what you're talking about. But for instance, the woman who was in World War II, doing that research allowed me to, see how her experiences compared to women's experiences as a whole, and where her story might fit into that context. Quick sip of water. Okay, so after you've done research, you're going to start writing your questions. And these questions, some people debate whether you should go into an oral history interview with a list of questions. There are those who feel like you should know your topic so well that you can talk about it without having a list. But I tend to take a list with me. Just, it's a way to stay on track, and it kind of takes the pressure off of you in the heat of the moment. So there are several websites that you can go to online that will give you sample oral history questions. The ones on the screen, and they're also on the handout, they are ones that I've used quite a bit. And depending on the app that you use, like if you use a phone app, it's specifically for oral histories. They may have a list of questions. The StoryCorps, their app, you can find a list of questions to ask there. So, there's no reason to completely reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Go to Google, type in, oral history questions for grandparents, oral history questions for veterans, or whatever, your topic's going to be, and you're probably going to find some questions. So start with that, and then work your way to the questions that you want to ask, because really, your topic better than any website's going to know it. So when writing questions, when forming them, there are some things to keep in mind. The first thing to think about, or the first thing to remember, is to keep your questions open-ended. Avoid questions that can be answered in 1 or 2 words. An example that was given to us in college, and it's kind of stuck with me. If you ask somebody, what was your first car? You're probably going to get a 1, 2, 3 word response, a Ford, and they're going to leave it at that. So if you instead said, well, tell me about getting your first car, that could elicit a story. For instance, if you asked me about getting my first car, I might tell you how my grandparents gave me that first car my senior year of high school, and that might lead to stories about my grandparents. It might lead to stories about school, but it's going to be more than a 1-word answer. A good way to think about it is, ask essay questions so you get essay response. So think about, when you were at school and you were taking a test and you go to the last page and there's an essay question and you have to reply in 4 paragraphs. So, that one word answer, that one word or that one sentence isn't going to be enough. You want to draw out those paragraphs. When you're forming questions, you also want to make sure that they're non-leading. You want to make sure to keep your opinions and your ideas out of the questions. For instance, we've all learned about the Great Depression, and there were parts of it that sounded really bad and like it would have been a really hard time to live through. But I've also talked to people who have said it wasn't that bad for us. We didn't know any different. It didn't affect my family like it did others. So when you ask somebody something like about their experiences in the Great Depression, you don't want to say something like, well, it must have been really rough living through the Great Depression, because you're putting your opinion into that question. You would want to say something like, well, tell me what it was like for your family living on a farm during the Great Depression, because that's going to get their opinion. If you put your opinion into that question, they may give you a response that matches the opinion that you placed in it. So try to leave it open-ended. Try to not sway the answer one way or the other. Another tip is to start easy. And with every interview I do this, I start out with some very basic, very easy questions. Things like, tell me your full name and when and where you were born. Who are your parents and what do they do for a living? What were they like? What was your childhood like? Did you have siblings? Where did you go to school? What did you do for a career? These are questions that most people already have answers to. They don't really have to think about them. And so this gives you and the person a chance to kind of relax into the interview and to build a relationship. And it's just a good way to start out. You're also going to want to actively listen. And so make sure you're actively listening to the interview. It's easy to space out if you have things on your mind or if you're a little anxious or nervous. But if you actively listen, you're going to be able to ask more questions and better follow-up questions. Or, if there's something that needs clarification, you can ask for them to maybe repeat their answer or to expand on their answer. And this isn't on the list, but it's also important. Don't get attached to your list of questions. It's okay if the interview goes a completely different direction than you planned. If you're still getting good information, let it flow. If it gets to be a little irrelevant or it's, what they're saying is really not that helpful, you can gently try to steer them back to the questions that you created. But, just because you have the questions doesn't mean you have to stay with them. Okay, some things to keep in mind regarding setup for the interview and location. Remember that audio recordings pick up everything from babies crying across the library to refrigerators humming in the next room, a ticking clock, air conditioner units. Some of these things are more annoying than others. And the hum of the AC unit, it's not the worst thing in the world, but a ticking clock, on the other hand, can be pretty awful. One of the first interviews I did for the library was in a lady's home, and there was a clock in the room, and it didn't bother me at the time. I didn't even notice it really, but going back and listening to that recording, it's awful. The clock is like the main thing you hear. And there is software out there that you can use to edit audio files. I use a free open source software called Audacity, and I will say it's not very intuitive to use. But there are tons of YouTube videos out there, fortunately, and you can go to YouTube and figure out what you need to do to edit the audio to that program. It can edit out some background noises, but the more that you edit that audio file, the quality of the recording goes down. It kind of distorts the sound. So, while you can do a little bit and it'll be okay, you can't do a ton of editing on it. So you want to scout out your location beforehand and look for any potential noise issues that way you don't have to do a ton of editing. Most of us don't have a recording studio, so we're going to have some noise. It's just unavoidable, but try to avoid what you can. Another thing you want to have in the location that you're recording in is outlets. I mean, you can never have too many outlets, whether you need to charge some batteries or you need to charge or plug in your audio recorder or things like that. And also you want to think about the comfort of that area. You want to think about the physical comfort. Okay, is the person I'm interviewing, are they going to be able to sit in this location for an hour, hour and a half, and just, be comfortable and when they're talking. But you also want to think about the mental comfort of them. Where are they going to be the most comfortable? Where are they going to be their most relaxed? Sometimes that is in a person's home. I've done interviews where I've met people at their church. It's just where they want to be and where they're going to be the most relaxed and feel at ease talking to you. Things to bring with you during the interview: extra batteries, especially if your recorder is running off of batteries. Something I probably should have mentioned when I was talking about what to look for when you buy a recorder is, can your recorder be plugged into an outlet and still run? If you can plug your recorder in, that's way easier than having to think about, well, okay, if the battery's still good, is it going to die during this recording? So think about that. Chargers, extra batteries, extension cords. Perhaps you're not close to an outlet. That way you can still plug in. Pen and paper. There is some debate about whether or not you should take notes during an interview. Some people say it could be distracting to the person that's talking, and I can see that. I tend to take pen and paper and I do brief notes. I jot things down, if there's a name I need to remember or a date, or maybe there's a question that pops in my mind that I jot down, or if they said something and I don't want to interrupt them, but I do want to follow back to it, I may make a note about that. You want to bring things like water. Talking for an hour, hour and a half can be hard, so having that water is a good thing. Bring tissues, especially if it's allergy season, or if you're going to be talking about something that's maybe sensitive or it can be emotional. And really, it's emotional for anybody to talk about their life and the things they've experienced. So it's just handy to have. Bring a camera if you have one. Take a picture of the interviewee. Take a picture of the location where you're recording. Take a picture with the interviewee. Document this event. And then lastly, another thing to bring is trigger objects. And we'll talk more about this in a second. But trigger objects are basically objects that you can bring or they can bring that will start a conversation. And it's just going to help the interview. Okay, so now we're going to slide over to things to think about during your interview. And this will be things like introductions, etiquette, trigger objects that I just mentioned, and release forms. So this is going to sound super easy and super obvious, but you always want to start your interview off with an introduction and include things like your name, the interviewee's name, the date, the location, and a brief summary of what you're going to be talking about. My introductions go something like this. Good evening, my name is Kristen Bennett, and I'm a local history assistant at the Spartanburg County Public Libraries. Today is May the 20th, 2019, and I am here in the BMW boardroom for the headquarters library with Ms. Jane Doe. And today, Ms. Doe has agreed to discuss her memories of attending Carver High School. Having this kind of introduction simply ensures that once the interviewee and interviewer and everybody connected with that interview is gone, we still know who and what this interview is about. You can say, well, I put it in the transcript. Well, what if we lose the transcript? You can say, well, I put it in the file folder for this interview. Well, what if we lose the file folder or that piece of paper falls out? I promise you, future listeners are going to thank you, researchers are going to thank you, the archives this interview might end up in, they're going to thank you just to have that information there. Trigger objects. So these are things that you can bring to the interview or that the interviewee can bring to the interview that are going to start conversations. And so it could be letters, it could be scrapbooks, photographs, a map, just anything that's going to help bring up things to talk about. And you can bring these for the interviewee can bring them. I talked to one lady and it was part of the school's project. And so she brought little photographs of her and her siblings in their graduation suit or graduation gowns. She brought the Bible that she received when she graduated. And so these were just objects that helped her. I think they gave her a level of comfort almost, but also started those conversations. Sometimes I bring trigger objects. I was talking to another lady for the school's project, and I had gone through some yearbooks for the time that she was at the school. And so I had said something, well, I saw that you were on student council. You held a position on student council. And she said, no, I didn't. I said, no, you did. It was in the yearbook. I saw a picture of you. And so we pulled the yearbook out and found the picture where she was in student council. And, that's just a memory she hadn't thought about in years, and she had kind of forgotten. And so that started a conversation, and it was interesting. Interview etiquette. So here's some things that you need to just be aware of when you're interviewing someone, some things to do. First of all, you want to actively listen, and we've discussed this already, but you need to actively listen to the interviewee. It can definitely be easy to zone out if there's things on your mind or you're feeling anxious. I've done it. I'll be sitting there and the guy's talking, and I just realized I don't know what he said. I don't know how he responded to a question. And so I kind of have to hope, well, I hope he answered it because I have no idea. So you want to actively listen just because it helps you ask follow-up questions, stay relevant in the interview. But the interviewee needs to know that you're interested in what they're telling you. So actively listen and use your body language to assure them that you are listening. Nod your head, smile, look them in the eye, lean in, relax, things like that. However, please do not don't filter the interview with verbal assurance. We all have done this, and it's my biggest pet peeve, and I've done it. But try not to do things like say, yes, okay, after every comment they make. It's when you go back to the recording, it's just really distracting. It's okay if they're talking and you need to say like, oh, I understand, or well, that's really interesting, but just don't do that continuous use of that verbal assurance. It's not needed. Use your body language to let them know that, yeah, you agree, or yeah, you understand. Also, you want to make sure that you ask one question at a time. It's easy to string 2 or 3 questions into one question, but when you do that, you run the chance of them not answering every question. So it's easier just to ask your question, let them answer, and then move on to the next question. Instead of trying to fit in 2 or 3 at one time. You also want to make sure that there's only one speaker at a time. Don't interrupt your speaker. Let them finish that thought before you address whatever it is that you want to address. I tend to not have more than one person being interviewed at a time. Every now and then I'll have to. I've interviewed some brothers, and there was 2 there. But for the most part, it's easier just to talk to one person. But I do let people bring, if they need to bring a friend or a relative, for support. Sometimes we'll have that additional person sitting in the room, but for the most part, just one at a time. So this next one is kind of hard, but embrace the silence. It's really easy to feel like you need to rush to fill awkward silences, but there's really no harm in letting it sit for a few seconds, even longer than you feel comfortable letting it sit. First of all, the interviewee might be trying to gather their thoughts or trying to decide how they're going to respond, but also that silence is as awkward for them as it is for you. And so if you let it sit long enough, they may rush to fill it. And by doing that, they may provide additional information that you wouldn't have gotten any other way. And also, sometimes you're going to need to rephrase or repeat the question. Sometimes people are going to get off track. I've had 1 or 2 interviews where the person definitely had an agenda, and no matter what I asked, they were going to steer the conversation back to what they wanted to talk about. It could be 2 completely opposite things, but they could find their way back to where they wanted to be. But for the most part, people want to give you the information that you're looking for. Sometimes people may wander, and that's okay. Sometimes you can get really good information after people have wandered down a rabbit trail. However, if it gets too off topic or it needs to be steered back to the main focus, you could say something like, well, that's really interesting, but could we talk a little bit more about this? Or, earlier you said this, could you explain that? Or could you tell me more about that? If you're not getting the answer you need, you could always try to rephrase or repeat the question and get them to elaborate a little bit more on it. Just gently guide them back or to where you need to be. And lastly, sometimes you're going to have things said that contradict what you know to be fact. Sometimes people don't remember exactly how things happened. Sometimes people look at the past through rose-colored glasses, but there is something to how people remember an event or a place or a time. And when you can address comments where there's glaring issues, you have to be very tactful about how you handle them. You don't want to start a debate or offend anybody. After all, they're sharing their stories with you. They're the ones who live this. And so you want to respect that. If there's a problem that you definitely have to address, you can't let that just sit there. Try saying things like, well, some people say this. What do you think about that? Or, well, I've heard this. Do you know anything about that? How do you feel about that? Just be respectful, though, if you're not here to start a debate and things like that. Okay, and release forms. So if you hear nothing else in this entire lecture, hear this, because this is really important. Make sure that you have a release form and make sure that you explain to the interviewee why you're interviewing them and how the interview might be used. If you don't have a release form signed, then you won't be able to legally use the interview at all. There are several examples of release forms that can be found online. You can do a Google search, just say oral history release form, and every program that's got an oral history program is probably going to pop up. This is a copy of ours, and it basically says that the interviewee has voluntarily agreed to take part in the oral history interview, and the interviewer has explained the purpose of the project. It also says that by signing the release form, the interviewee is given rights to the interview to Spartanburg County Public Libraries, and that we can use it in various ways, including presentations, exhibits, putting it online, using it in a book, things of that nature. But like if you're wanting to use your interview for a family history book, or you're wanting to donate it to an archive, you have to have a release form signed. And if you have questions about those or you need better examples, just feel free to reach out and I can shoot you some links that will be helpful. Okay, so now we're going to close by looking at things to think about after you've done the interview. So first of all, we're going to talk about locks, and this is really basic, but lots of copies keep stuff safe. As soon as that interview is over and you get back to your workspace, you need to download that interview and make multiple copies. At the library, I have a folder that is just audio files, original audio files that I save for every interview that I do. And then I have another folder where I have the person's name and I save a copy of the audio file there along with other documents. Think about having a external hard drive or maybe saving it to a cloud. Just as soon as you just want to be safe. You don't want to lose all of your interviews because your computer crashes or because it gets a virus or something like that. Another thing that I didn't mention the last time we did this lecture, but just because you have saved multiple copies of your audio doesn't mean that it's completely safe. We know that technology is always changing, so you're going to have to go back consistently and make sure that your files are updated. Make sure that you're changing formats because you don't want to leave it in a format that's going to become obsolete, and then 10 years from now when you try to listen to that interview, it's gone. So just be aware of how technology changes and keep an eye on that. Also, transcribing. This is not fun. I enjoy it, but it's not fun for everybody. But it's important to transcribe your interview. And if you don't know what I mean by transcribing, I type out the interviews that I do word for word. And there's several reasons I do this. Again, we go back to the locks idea. Lots of copies keep stuff safe. If I lose an audio file, well, hopefully I'm still going to have the transcript. Just another copy, another way to ensure that interview lasts. Also, accessibility and usability. Really, Very few people are going to sit down and listen to an hour and a half interview. I mean, you may find them, but not everybody's going to do that. A lot of people want to make sure that, this interview is relevant to what I need. So having a transcript that they can either read through or keyword search is going to make your interview more usable. I transcribe a lot because I feel like it makes me more familiar with my oral history interviews. I transcribe them, then I have to edit and proof them and things like that. So I spend a lot of time with the interview once I get back to the library. It's nothing for me to spend probably 10 hours with a transcript over the course, of processing it. So, and because I do that, it just makes, I know my collection or the collection a little bit better than I would if I sent it off to be transcribed. Another reason to transcribe is if you think you might want to donate this interview to an archive. A lot of them prefer for you to have that transcript for them when you donate it. So that's another reason. There are sources, there are businesses that you can go to that you can pay to transcribe your oral history if you need them to. There's programs that try to, I can't think of the right word, but there are programs that will transcribe it for you. They're not quite accurate though. The ones that I have seen or have tried, it's been more work to edit the transcriptions than it was for me to do it myself. The tool that I use and that I found most helpful is Transcribe, and there's a link to this, I think, on the handout also. But it allows you to control the audio from the keyboard. And so you go to the little page, you start transcribing, you can rewind, you can fast forward, you can slow down the audio, all from the keyboard. And so that's the tool that I've been using. And I will say, if you start transcribing, the first couple of transcriptions that you do are going to be a complete pain, and it's going to seem tedious, and it's going to seem aggravating. I mean, I remember being back in college and having to transcribe interviews, and it was just the worst. But the more you do it, the faster and the easier it gets. So it's one of those things, practice makes perfect. Okay, so after you have transcribed the interview, here's some things that you want to think about. What's the accuracy of this interview like? Are there any glaring issues? Are there things I need to follow up on? Maybe I need something to be explained better. Maybe, well, this is interesting. I should have asked more questions about this. And so, do I need to schedule a second interview? And then you want to think about, how did their story relate to the context of history? Where does this story fit in? Is it similar to other stories? Is it completely different? Why is it important? And then you want to give your interviewee the transcript back and let them look at it. Let them see if they need to request edits to it. Are there things that they want taken out? Are there things that they want to explain better? This is their story, and so you want to give them that chance to have the final say that, okay, the interview's fine, I'm good with it. And lastly, you want to make sure to follow up with a thank you note. It's just common courtesy. Like I said, these people have taken time out of their life. They've shared personal stories with you. And so it's only nice and it's only right to let them know how much you appreciate that. And you also want to make sure that they get a copy of their oral history interview to safekeep. And that's all that I have. But I am happy to answer questions if you have any, or if you've done some oral histories, I'd love to hear about them, or if you have ideas for projects, anything.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm going to hit unrecord or